President Trump says arrangements have begun for a face-to-face meeting between Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy.
This following a White House summit between Trump, Zelenskyy, and 7 European leaders.
Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelenskyy and by the people of Ukraine working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it.
That trilateral meeting could take place within 2 weeks. This almost 4 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, leading to 1.4 million combined casualties.
With more, we're joined by retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer. Hal, good to see you. Let's start by focusing in on the Trump-Zelenskyy relationship. The two men have met. They've spoken a number of times since February's Oval Office blow-up, but back in the Oval today, it was a different feeling, whether we're talking tone or even dress. What's your initial reaction to what you saw today?
Micah, it was very cordial. It was, a lot of mutual respect between the two leaders. I mean, literally, when President Zelenskyy got out of the car, President Trump greeted him very warmly, shaking his hand, putting his hand behind his back. Of course, you also saw that President Zelenskyy wore a kind of a suit. It's a little bit of a modified suit, if you will, but he didn't wear his typical military attire. And, of course, that was part of that February dust-up in the Oval Office. That was one of the things that came up. And so it was a very cordial, positive interaction, and it stayed that way throughout the entire day.
Well, this was obviously more than just Zelenskyy. This was a massive summit, impressive when you actually look at the optics. The president of the EU, Secretary General of NATO, and 5 other European leaders. Now, does this suggest a possible growing appetite for peace, as it seems like everyone looking for a ceasefire?
Sure, it certainly does on the Western side. It's still not clear how much appetite for peace Putin has. Putin still feels, as everyone believes he does, that he's winning, even though he's making very slow marginal gains at phenomenal losses. It does kind of raise that question. And right now, as it stands, this idea of a trilateral meeting with Zelenskyy, Putin, and Trump is still being coordinated, and there just seemed to be a little bit of hesitance when President Trump reached out today. President Putin didn't immediately jump on it and say, oh, yeah, let's put it together. So it's not quite clear if this is going to come about real soon, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, reporting does suggest, Hal, that the president paused today's summit to call President Putin mid-summit. What does that tell you about progress in these talks, especially so soon after Friday's Alaska summit?
Well, what I read into that part was that they had enough agreement at that point that he could, okay, let me go ahead and call President Putin. The other thing, too, is from that call, everyone there can kind of, sense where Russia's position is, where Putin's position is. And I think that was what they wanted to do, is say, hey, look, we're at this point. Call President Putin, see if he's amenable to it, and let's see where we are and continue our discussion. And the discussions went on for quite some time. They finished the formal meetings, and they continued the meetings that went on for a while. By the way, one of the reports out was that they'd never seen so many cars, armored limousines outside the White House. It was quite the parking coordinated event.
It certainly was. These meetings have also involved, obviously, the president, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and others. But there is now an unlikely name that has been added to the mix, and that's First Lady Melania Trump, who wrote a so-called peace letter to President Putin saying that it is time to protect the children. And today, President Zelenskyy brought a letter from his own wife. What do you make of this First Lady back channel?
This is absolutely fascinating. I've never seen anything like this before. She wrote that letter to President Putin, and it was basically addressing the children. And of course, there's somewhere between 20 to 30,000 Ukrainian children that have been effectively kidnapped, if you will, by Russia. That's what the International Criminal Court indictment for Russia or for Putin is about the children. And then you see this reciprocity with President Zelensky's wife and Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, actually brought this up specifically when they were going around the table. So this has become kind of a, it's a big thing in the total negotiation, but they're definitely pushing it out front. And that might be a wedge, if you will, to kind of something that they can split the Russian position on some other things, at least maybe get the children back.
So, Hal, let's look ahead then. President Trump says he's begun to make arrangements for a trilateral meeting. What can we expect from that meeting, and what do you see as the most likely outcome when it comes to possible land swaps, safety guarantees, or NATO membership?
Well, first off, I don't see NATO membership coming really anytime soon. Land swaps, that's going to be part of a long, involved negotiation. And the Russians really have to offer something. So far, the Russian position is, hey, give us everything we haven't taken that we've been fighting over that we may not take for 4 more years or more or longer of fighting. And then we'll consider this. And of course, keep in mind, every agreement with Putin, he's violated to date. So they don't really trust him on that regard. But I think what you might see is a meeting that takes place. They might agree on a ceasefire. Chancellor Merz, President Macron of France, Merz of Germany brought that up specifically. Of course, President Trump had moved off of that after the Putin summit and said, let's go for a full peace deal. But they brought up that ceasefire idea. That might be something that we might see come out of it. That may raise its head again in these negotiations.
So, a lot of talk today about whether or not a ceasefire is needed in order to find a peace deal. In your opinion, Hal, is one needed to achieve the other? And after nearly 4 years, is peace on the horizon, or did today's meeting feel a little vague?
It felt a bit vague. I mean, there were no specific outcomes from this, other than the fact, of course, the biggest outcome was that they all agree there needs to be a trilateral meeting. I think one of the outcomes was also that it was very cordial, very different from that Oval Office event that took place in February. It went off very seamlessly. It was good, positive tone throughout the entire day. So I thought that was a really good outcome that came out of this whole thing. But we're gonna have to see where this really goes. We're gonna have to see how it ends up here. I think there's a possibility, at least in my opinion, I think there's a possibility of maybe putting a ceasefire in place before they do this, even though President Trump and President Putin have both said, no, we're going to go for a full ceasefire agreement. I think the complexity of this, and I think that's where the Europeans are, is, hey, we got to put a ceasefire in place before we do anything else.
Yeah, well, the idea from what we're seeing is to get Putin and Zelenskyy together, in the words of President Trump, in the next week or two. We'll see where it goes. Continue to watch it. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer, thanks for being with us.
All right. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Sarah.